Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, Wizards of the Coast has begun announcing new videos over on EN World. Solodark, the Shadowdark solo rules, have been released by Arcane Library for free. We're going to talk about a standalone local 5e character builder known as More Purple, More Better. It has been around for a long time. A patron brought it up to me, and we're going to talk about that today. And today's main topic is going to be on the large topic of building a resilient weekly RPG game. How do you get players? How do you find players? How do you keep the game strong? And how do you build a resilient game that can flex with the number of players that can actually show up from session to session so that you can run more sessions? We're going to talk all about that today. And we have questions from June 2024 Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. This show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to the awesome Lazy DM community over on Discord. They get access to the Patreon Q&A every week. They get a bunch of tips, tools, tricks, product previews, all kinds of stuff that you get to help you actually run the role-playing games that you're running. And most of all, you helping me put on shows like this. Patrons, thank you so much for your outstanding support. I was very happy to see this past week that Wizards of the Coast themselves have begun to post posts and answer questions over on EN World. For those of us refugees of Twitter who have left it after it became X, one of the areas that I have gone to is EN World. EN World is a very long-standing, long-term forum that's focused around role-playing games run by Russ Morrissey, aka Morris, for I don't know, like 20 years. It's been around forever. It is old enough that Gary Gygax has posts on this forum. It has been around for a very, very long time. And it's great to see Wizards of the Coast actually engaging with people over on EN World. I was very complimentary. Latia, the community manager for Wizards of the Coast, had posted over there, starting with, hey, we've got videos that are going to be coming out where we're talking about everything that you need to know for the 2024 players. So I think it's outstanding. I was really happy to see it. Here is the example of the post that Latia had put up over on EN World. You can find a link to this, to the post and to the EN World over in the show notes. But really outstanding to see Wizards of the Coast connecting with community members over on a platform that isn't one of the big social media platforms. If you want to see the links to the video, I will link to the post that she made over on EN World and also replies. I asked a whole pile of questions about what's going to happen with D&D Beyond in 2024. She wasn't able to answer those questions other than to say that the compendium will certainly be around. So that's been interesting. I actually have a bet with a fine member of the Sly Flourish community on whether or not the D&D Beyond character builder for 2024 D&D will be up at the same time as the core books. I am betting they will not, because I think you are always a safe bet to bet against technology. I think technology is really hard. Programming is really hard. So I think if you're ever going to take a 50-50 bet, and that bet is whether or not a particular big heavy piece of IT is going to be up and running or not, I think you can always bet against it. I don't think it's a 50-50 odd. Could it be? Sure. But I think the odds are in my favor. It's just kind of a fun bet. I'm not even going to describe what the bet actually is, or like what we gain or lose, but it's just for fun. But yeah, so anyway, it was neat to see, and I'm very happy, and I really hope Wizards spends more time engaging in communities like this, particularly off of enshittified social media platforms where we have kind of stepped away from those platforms and gone to other communities that are run by true fans of the game, like Morris over at EN World. I don't have to worry about Morris completely destroying this community. He's been running it for a long, long time. So yeah, Captain Geek says, I have worked in IT. You are right to bet against simultaneous release. Yes. Also, I am a software engineer by trade, and I know how hard it is to get things to be released on time. And so who knows? I think my bet is safe. So thank you to Wizards of the Coast for engaging with the community over on EN World. I think that's absolutely outstanding. I hope you do more of that. This last week, Kelsey Dion released Solodark. Solodark are the Shadowdark solo rules. They are available. It's a 16-page PDF. You can get it for free. You will find a link down in the show notes for how to get that. Kelsey also has a couple of different videos. She has a new video I actually haven't finished watching yet. I just started it, where she talks about creating this. I will link to that video as well. Really cool stuff. Very, the kind of a straightforward design of the idea of how do you run and how do you modify the rules of Shadowdark in order to play Shadowdark solo, with a whole idea around the use of the Oracle. Oracle dice is like having a die roll kind of determine things that normally a GM would sort of determine, but you don't want to determine as a player because you are biased and you might steer it more towards things that you're doing. But a lot of different modified rules, very straightforward stuff, and really cool tables. So like, how do you build your characters? And her examples are, you use the adventures that exist inside Shadowdark already. I think she says to aim for 2 to 4 PCs. You want more than one, and if you do one, have them at a higher level. But 2 to 4 PCs is like how many you would actually run on. More than 4, and it's too hard to track. Solodark RPG. Here is the actual picture of the RPG. I realized that my video wasn't actually showing it, so now I fixed it. And it is a nice, short, 16-page set of solo rules for running Shadowdark. Focuses on the Oracle die, has like characters. Look at this poor bastard. This guy's clearly up front. He's got a nail in his head. He's missing his teeth. Something terrible happened to his nose. He's clearly up front. And you have links to different places that talk about how to run solo RPGs. That's great. Blog posts, podcasts, social media, YouTube, and so on. This is really cool. References to stuff for the material that you might want to run in order to run a solo Shadowdark rule that aren't necessarily from Shadowdark. Index Card RPG, Monster Revolt, Knave 2.0, Tome of Adventure Design, lots of different sources and inspiration for things that you can use in order to run your solo RPG. Cool artwork, as always. I really dig this art. Look at those cultists. That's great. Oh, I love that. That piece of artwork is fantastic. Dungeon names. I love this dungeon names. Laboratory of the Celestial Cult, or Halls of the Poisonous Pirates, or Hideout of the Blighted Betrayer, right? You roll 3D100 and you get a cool name for what your dungeon looks like. The Oracle. So I was coming up with an interesting idea about oracles, which is I think that you could take like a D20 in many circumstances, and I'm kind of digging into this a little bit. I'll probably start by writing a Sly Flourish article about it, and then probably talk about it someone on the show. The idea of a tableless oracle die. And the idea is, what if you could just roll a die and you didn't need a table and the die still told you something? And the idea would be sort of like a roll for the extremity of something. How extreme is the situation? How hard are the monsters? How hostile are the monsters? How close or far away are the monsters? How hard or how severe or how mild is the weather? Attitudes of NPCs. Lots of different things where you can just roll a die, and if it's high, it's high. If it's low, it's low. If it's high, it's close by. If it's low, it's further away. You can essentially just roll a D20 and use the scale of the D20 to tell you like how severe something is or not. I think there's more to that, but a lot of times people are rolling like an oracle die and you have like a yes, no, like 1 to 9, no, a twist on a 10, and 11 to 20 is yes. This one actually seems to weigh closer towards no or a twist than it does on yes. So you make your oracle your oracle die roll, and then you have these prompts, and the prompts are also like ways to kind of shake up your thoughts on this. And one thing that I think is probably true about the solo rules, again, available for free over on the Shadowdark RPG website, I will link to it in the show notes, is they're good ways for GMs to shake up our minds when we're prepping our game. So beyond just running a solo RPG, we can get ideas from these prompts, from Oracle dice, from dungeon names, in order to kind of flesh out adventures that we're building for players, if we're playing in a game that isn't a solo game. Dismantle discovery, resist weakness. What are the verbs? What are the nouns? You've got these verbs and nouns, 100 of each that you can roll on that can kind of shake up your thoughts on it. So really cool stuff. Fantastic book. You can actually buy, if you want to have a booklet style soft cover, I think it's $9 to buy a booklet style soft cover. Really, really cool. I love it. For the price is absolutely great, right? There's no reason not to recommend a product that doesn't cost you anything to go get. So I would highly recommend picking up the Solodark rules by Shadowdark, by Arcane Library, by Kelsey Dion, available right now. You can find a link in the show notes. Very, very cool stuff. So I've been bringing up the whole concept of like digital character builders and how important are digital character builders to the RPGs that we run. I think that for a lot of players, a digital character builder can be pretty important. If you are not one of those people, if you don't feel that digital character sheets are very important and that players are just fine working with pen and paper and a physical book, then this probably isn't much of a concern to you. You can decide whether or not you want to listen to this or not. That's up to you. But if you don't think it's a problem, then it's probably not a problem for you and you don't have to worry about it. Likewise, there are many people who are happy with online character builders. Things like Roll20, things like Foundry, things like Shard, things like D&D Beyond are all online character builders where you go, you subscribe to a service, use, and you can build a character for your game, particularly for your 5e game. Shard, for example, is an outstanding hosted provider for being able to build 5e characters using things like Tales of the Valiant or 5e with some of their own modified stuff. D&D Beyond is obviously the great big one. Like D&D Beyond is owned by Wizards of the Coast and owned by Hasbro, as all of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition material available in it. Has a really, really good character builder. Really easy to use, really usable for new players and everything like that. It's got lots of little bits here and there that I don't like. The thing that drives me most crazy is that there is no legitimate way to filter out sources from the character builder itself if the players own that material. So you can't, for example, say, I want to make sure not to show material from the Strixhaven book if they happen to buy Strixhaven stuff. There isn't a way to do that. Please don't post saying, oh no, you can filter it out. All you have to do is do X and Y. Trust me. You can't filter it out from the character builder if the players have the material already. If they, for example, bought Tasha's and they have all the Tasha stuff, you as a DM can't say, hey, for this campaign, we don't want to include the following stuff from Tasha's. You can make sure they can't see the book. You cannot prevent it from being in the character builder. Trust me, I've tried. And trust me, I know what I'm talking about. But it's still a really, really good character builder. Obviously, it was a $130 million acquisition by Wizards of the Coast to buy that character builder. So we would hope that it's good. But it's also hosted, which means you have to trust that you have that connection. You have to trust. I think there's like an offline mode. So if you have the app on your iPhone and you download your characters and you download the source material, as long as you have your iPhone, as long as, and even if it's offline, it can still work. But you can't really guarantee that like years from now it'll work. So you might be interested in something that is more of an offline character builder, something that you can use to build characters offline. Let's say you're one of the weird folks like me who's kind of interested in self-hosting stuff where it's like, I don't want to necessarily trust that a company is going to keep something up to date or that the company is going to keep going in a direction that I want to go. And I want to have a platform where once I buy it, or download it, I own it and I can use it any way I want. And so when I've been talking about this, I had a patron who said, hey, have you looked at More Purple, More Better? Now, More Purple, More Better has actually been around a long time, and I remember it in the earliest days of 5e. This is a PDF-based form-fillable character sheet, probably a really, really advanced as form-fillable character sheets go. Very, very advanced. It has an active Patreon. It has an active Discord community. It is open source. You can find the internal materials on GitHub. It is highly extendable by being able to create your own modules. People have created modules and created add-on packs that have other character options from other sources and things like that. So it's very extendable as well. And it was actually built before D&D Beyond. I remember this being in use in the earliest days of 5th edition, like in the 2014 days of 5th edition. I remember the initial More Purple, More Better sheets were being used. And then when tools like D&D Beyond came out, people kind of pivoted away from having like form-fillable PDFs and switching over to being able to use more online tools that made it pretty easy. But More Purple, More Better, which is hard to say. More Purple, More Better. More Purple, More Better. It's actually kind of hard to say. More Purple, More Better is still, and I hadn't been paying much attention to it, but I started paying attention to it again when patrons were like, hey, you should check this out. And it's still around, and it's actually still there and still works. Now, I am not here to convince you that you should switch from whatever tool you like for managing your characters to switching to this. That is not why I'm talking about it. I'm not here to sell you on any one particular application to do character building. I think I want to expose you to different ones. I want you to learn about Shard. I want you to learn about Demiplane. I want you to learn about Roll20, which now is owned by Roll20. Demiplane is now a Roll20 property. I keep remembering that. But I want you to know what those different tools are so that you can be aware that they're around. And if you decide, you know what, I'm really not happy with what I am using and I wish I had a tool that could do X, Y, and Z, I want you to know that there are other tools out there. I am going to try to demonstrate what More Purple, More Better looks like. So this is More Purple, More Better. The biggest disadvantage, let me tell you just up front, the biggest disadvantage this tool has is it is dependent upon Adobe Reader. You have to use Adobe Reader to do this. The underlying technology that's used for this offline character builder is a PDF that is filled with lots of JavaScript. And the only tool that it is built to support it is Adobe Reader. So that also makes it kind of brittle, because I don't know that later versions of Adobe Reader are going to be compatible with the one you have now. So that whole idea of like, once you download the form fillable character sheet from More Purple, More Better, means it will work forever. I don't know that that's the case. I would actually kind of doubt that's the case, because I wouldn't be surprised if Adobe Reader puts things in place that break it. Those of you who have been working with More Purple, More Better for the last 10 years or so might be able to say, actually, no, the oldest versions of the sheet still work with the current version of Adobe Reader. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't, because it's a pretty complicated system. It wouldn't surprise me if it's brittle, and I haven't used it. I used it like twice. This is my third time playing around with it. So I don't know how resilient it is to the change of Adobe Reader. Also, Adobe kind of sucks. Adobe Reader kind of sucks. And using it as a platform in order to manipulate your stuff, it's slow. Like, I'm on a pretty powerful computer and it still runs slow. It's still a little awkward to use. There's a lot of weird like Adobe stuff that pops up all the time. They're definitely not my favorite company in the world. So the whole idea of like, oh, we're breaking away and we're independent, like, not really. Now you're going over from what Wizards built to what Adobe built. Do we trust them too? But it does have this downloadable system, and it's pretty powerful. So one of the things that you have to do right away is decide what sources you are going to include in your sheet. What material are you going to be able to convert over? And right now I have so you can actually like put it all over or put it over. So the ones that are included, I don't need the Adventurers League stuff. Select a node because Adobe is stupid. So we're going to include the system reference document in there. We would definitely want to include that. Adventurers League, I don't need to include that. I don't know what this is saying exactly. There we go. So we're just going to use the 5.1 SRD material. Now, this is where More Purple, More Better gets into kind of weird state. It used to be a file that was available on the DMs Guild. However, Wizards of the Coast asked them no longer to host it on the DMs Guild, because the only real way to use this with options beyond the system reference document is to download them pseudo-legally. I will tell you, it's not hard to find material for other stuff, and it is unfortunate that the other material that is available is still not openly releasable. That's not to say it's not easy to find and not hard to find. It's pretty easy to find it. And I'm not crazy about the idea that the tool is sort of built with the recognition that the only way for you to get all the full functionality is to go and bootleg stuff somewhere. That's not great. One of the things, and one of the reasons I'm talking about this tool on the show, is I would really love to see this tool pivot over to Level Up Advanced 5e. My argument for doing so is Level Up Advanced 5e has tons of material available that mimics, it's actually way, way more. It's like 5 times more material available in the Level Up Advanced 5e book than is available in the 5.1 SRD. It includes feats, for example. The 5.1 SRD does not include feats. It includes all of the subclasses for various characters, and all of the spells, all the material you would want. And it's available under a Creative Commons license, which means it would be perfectly legal in order to include Level Up Advanced 5e material in this. That's something I would really love to see, and I think would make this tool a lot more beneficial. The other one would be including Black Flag. That Kobold Press Black Flag material is available. Black Flag is a little bit more limited. It only has, I think it's got a couple of subclasses. It doesn't have all the subclasses in Black Flag. I think it's only got like a couple per class, but they're good ones. Like the subclasses there's no dead subclasses in Black Flag. So that would be 2 other alternative versions of 5e that could be included in More Purple, More Better. That would make the tool a bigger draw for people without necessarily saying, hey, and by the way, go to the dark webs. And when you're buying your mushrooms, you can also download this thing that you can include in here so you can have stuff from like Xanathar's Guide. I'm not going to be showing that stuff, of course. I'm going to be focusing just on the stuff that's available in the system reference document. So I hit apply. That means that now the whole sheet recognizes the material that I have from the SRD. So I can include a fighter. I'm going to say, let's make like a 7th level fighter, right? I got my fighter. You can actually change the name of the class if you want to. So there's a fair bit of customization. We can only pick champion because that's the only one that's available as part of the SRD. And it even says like you can add a subclass by manually typing it in, but if you have other material from other sources, you can include that. So it immediately starts filling in stuff. It says your experience points. We're going to say, it says like, hey, we put enough experience points to match your level. Ability scores. Change ability scores has been detected as not applied automatically, but you can use the ability score dialog for that. Change the levels granted 2 new ability scores. Improvements, won't worry about that. Hit points, we can change skill proficiencies. It changed. So it changed a bunch of stuff based on what we did. And we still have to pick all of that. Backgrounds, there is only the Acolyte background because that's the only one that's available. And we are going to say we are a half-orc fighter, right? And it fills in some other stuff. So every time you fill this out, it sort of says what's going on there. We are going to do like the ability score dialogue. And we're actually going to use my setup of 16, 14, 14, 12, 12, 8. So we're going to have 16 for strength, 14 for dex, 14 for that, and we'll do, or 12, 10, 10 is mine, right? And it auto fills in all of the stuff on the other side. Skill proficiencies, we're not going to worry about. So, and you can see like now it's like auto filled things in there. I'm not going to go through like the whole thing on what you have here, but you can also do things like adding, it shows you like at level 7, what do you get? I'd have to go back and change the feats and stuff like that. It also has, let's see, if we go to items, it's got feats if you've got them. Magic item, it will have like whatever is inside your source. This is using the SRD material, so we can go to like a weapon. You can tell kind of clunky interface here, right? Weapon +2 or 3, 7th level +2. You click OK, and then it says what kind of weapon, and we're going to say greatsword, and we click greatsword, and then in our attacks, it now has +2 greatsword, +9 to hit, 2d6 +6 damage, heavy weapon-handed, crit on 1920, 1d6 extra crit. So you can tell it filled in a lot of the other material, and we can name our character's name will be Thandros of the Thunderer, because why not? Right, so now we have our nice sheet. There is a way to export the sheet, if I can find it here. Import, export is not what I want. Flatten. So when you click flatten, it makes a flattened version of the sheet that says, hey, we got rid of all of the other, we've got rid of all of the other stuff. So at that point, you can print it out. You can save the PDF in the flattened state so that it will be viewable in other PDF readers if you want to put it on your phone or on a tablet. So it's got features like that. So it's a pretty robust character sheet. Again, I've only played with it a couple of times. There are other people who have spent more time with it. And what I think is really interesting about it is A, it's open source. B, you can download it once. It is pay what you want over on the More Purple, More Better website. I will have a link to that in the show notes if you want to go try it out yourself. It does have the disadvantage of requiring Adobe Reader, and you're kind of like, have to sit with whatever Adobe Reader is going to do. But and then I would say it's a little bit clunky in how the whole thing kind of operates. But I was able to build like a 10th level character pretty quickly with it on my like second try. It really didn't take a whole lot of work. And I think it's an interesting alternative if you're looking for an alternative 5e character builder. So that is More Purple, More Better. Again, you can find a link in the show notes. And I think it's pretty cool. So I'm glad to show it off. But again, what I would really love to see is a Level Up 5e set of material available for this. I would use it quite a bit more. Now, Level Up Advanced 5e actually has a Google Sheets that one of the community members have built for that. And I'll probably show that in a future show. So that is More Purple, More Better. Over on the Sly Flourish Patreon, I have lots of different tools, but I wanted to show off one of the tools that I have been working on and spending some time with. It has recently had some big major updates, and I wanted to show it off, and that is the Artisanal Monster Database. The Artisanal Monster Database is a hosted and downloadable HTML-based database of monsters that have been released under open licenses for 5th edition. It specifically includes Level Up Advanced 5e's Monstrous Menagerie, Tome Beast 1, 2, and 3. The Tome Beast 1 is the actual 2023 edition of Tome Beast 1. The Creature Codex from Kobold Press, and Kobold Press's Black Flag SRD monsters. It has almost 2,500 different 5e monsters, including 2 different variants of these sort of core monsters that you can find. It is an extremely fast, no ads, no Java. Well, it does have JavaScript, but all of the JavaScript is there intended to help you find stuff. And actually, the monster pages have no JavaScript at all. All of the JavaScript here is just to help you sort through this big table. So if you want to say, I want to find an ancient, if I can spell it, ancient red dragon. It gives you both the CR26 Level Up Advanced 5e Ancient Red Dragon or the Black Flag, the Kobold Press Black Flag Ancient Red Dragon. You can click it, you get a nice clean HTML page that has all of the stats for that monster, including a link back to the original source. Sometimes I have page numbers. Black Flag, I don't have page numbers, but I think I have page numbers for everything else. And it is a really, really fast. You can either link to it directly from the website where I'm hosting it for patrons of Sly Flourish, but if you're a patron, you can also download a copy of it. So I'll give you an example. So right here, you have a download the database link. You click that, it downloads a 9 megabyte zip file, so not a very big zip file. And you open up that zip file. I'm going to do it right now, live on the show. You open up the zip, it creates a 5e monsters directory wherever you unzip it. And inside that directory is an index.html page. And now I am using the local version of it. This is all local stuff. So again, let's do a Void Dragon. Adult Ancient Void Dragon, right? CR24 for Entoma Beast 2023. You click that and you get the Void Dragon. And this is all running locally off of my local machine. So you can subscribe to the Patreon, get it, download your own copy, and you have your own copy that regardless of whatever I do with it or wherever I go or whatever happens, you have your own local copy of 2,500 5th edition monsters in HTML. But that's not all. You can also get all of them in Markdown. So you can go to Occultist and you can pick one. I go Cult Fanatic. I like Cult Fanatics. You type in Cult Fanatic, you get an A5E or Black Flag. You can click the Markdown version, and you get the Markdown version of this. You can copy this text, either put it into a text editor, stick it into Obsidian, stick it into Notion, and now you have a nicely formatted version that you can put into any kind of editor or tool that you're using that uses Markdown. The Markdown version of it is available. And again, completely either self-hostable, or you can just use the Sly Flourish version on your website. I would recommend downloading a copy. There's no reason for you to not click the download link, throw it in your folder, even if you want to use the remote one, because that way you might want to have a link on your phone so that you go click on your phone. That's what I do, is I trust my own website to stay up. So I have a link on my phone that lets me pull up monsters from anywhere. Ways to filter it is a little bit weird. So you can type in type. You can say, I want to find a aberrant or an aberration. And then you can type in like the name of the source. So you could say Black Flag. And then it will reduce it that way. So the best way to filter the data or to filter the monsters out, if you want to filter out by type or source, is to do that. And then what you can do is filter by type, and then you can use the slider on like challenge rating to be like, how tough a monster do you want to have? So you can say like, I want to see the Chul from Black Flag. So very, very fast. I think it's probably the fastest monster online tool you will find. And that's because there's actually no code behind it. It is all 100% HTML or text. The only JavaScript is on that front page in order to sort the table around. Everything else is all completely static, which means it's extremely fast. It's also very mobile friendly. You can find it on a mobile device. You can read the stat block on a mobile device, and it works. And it works really well. So that is the Artisanal, the 5e Artisanal Monster Database, a tool available to patrons of Sly Flourish. Just one of many different tools, one of many different features that patrons of Sly Flourish get access to. One that I'm particularly proud of. So take a look at that, and I hope you will join as a patron. So today's main topic is about building a resilient weekly game. There have been we had a really good conversation over on the Sly Flourish Discord server, also available to patrons of Sly Flourish. And I also saw an interesting post over on EN World that talked about like whether or not role-playing games are a good hobby or not. And it got into this topic, and one of our members brought up the whole topic of like, is the RPG hobby a heartbreaker hobby? And this is something I want to dive into a little bit more. And by like, what does it mean to be a heartbreaker hobby? And where did the EN World thread where I was reading about it and the conversation kind of went was, are there general expectations about what this hobby is going to be like that end up not getting met? And for some, that is absolutely true. I think that there are definitely times where like our impression of the way the hobby is going to be when we get into it is different than it actually ends up. And like a common way is many new GMs go in thinking, if I spend a lot of time building out a really big world and a really big story with lots of interesting details and gewgaws and doodads and lots of rich history and lots of, current events, that my players are going to flow right into that and it's going to be brilliant. And then the players like, we don't actually care about any of that. We just want to go on adventures and do stuff. And that sort of heartbreak, I think, happens pretty frequently. And it's a good sign of like a sophomore game master to recognize, wait a minute, my players are going to care about the things my players are going to care about, not necessarily the things that I care about. And I need to figure out how to come to grips with that and how to build that. And some GMs never come to grips with that. They always keep doubling down on their story. But you will hear me talk about spiral campaign development. I've hired other GMs that I've talked to where they talk about spiral campaign development, and the GM, the Dungeon Master's Guide talks about this. Like it's described in many, many different places. Focus on the characters first and build the world outwards. Like not as the only style, but as certainly one style. And for me, the style I will recommend. And I think you're going to have a lot less heartbreak if you build your campaign around the characters that the players bring to the table, while at the same time working with the players to build characters around the kind of campaign you want to run. If you do those two things, you're kind of setting better expectations for both you and your players and how that's going to work. But another big piece of heartbreak is even getting the group together in the first place. I have said since probably the beginning of the times that I've been offering any kind of advice on game mastering that the hardest part of this hobby is finding players. Finding and building a resilient group is really, really hard. And it's something that I have spent a lot of time on. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today in three main topics. One, finding a group. How do you find them? Particularly, how do you find an in-person group? I'm not going to talk so much about finding an online group, not because I don't think that's valid. I totally think that that's a valid way to play, but I've been focusing a little bit more on like, what would it take to find people to play in person? How to build a resilient group so that once you have the right players, how do you keep the game going? How do you run as many games as possible and cancel as infrequently as possible? And then how do you build your game itself, the structure of the kind of game you run? How do you build that with some flexibility to make sure that you can play as much as you can? So those are three things that we're going to talk about. So on the topic of like finding a group, I have written articles. You will find a link in the show notes to articles on Sly Flourish about how people find a group, but I haven't really looked into it recently. So I posted a recent poll over, not a poll, but like a comment over on YouTube where I tend to get like, 100-ish people that will answer on where they found in-person groups. And again, I'm focusing on in-person. Another time we'll talk about how to find people for online groups, but how do you just get people back? And the results that came back were mostly from these following categories. Friendly local game shops had 16 people mention that. I don't know that these numbers are 100% either, but a lot of people said finding groups in local game shops is one way to find a group. Facebook groups was also highly mentioned. Friends and family, another constant. Local libraries is a real good one. Community events like local game days or conventions that are happening in your area. Work colleagues. This one has worked a lot for me. I recruited a lot of my players, both from people that I worked with and also friends of people that I worked with. Reddit and Discord, other social media, organized play sessions, which kind of gets into your local game stores, and local gaming clubs, which may or may not be stores. So those were the common ways that people found it. I recall that sites like meetup.com were a way that you could sort of go and find people in the local area that wanted to go there. There's a social media site called Nextdoor that is really focused around regional stuff, like who are the people around your area. A lot of time it's like, hey, look, there's a strange person hanging out in my street. I should call the police. But sometimes you could actually post a post there and be like, hey, I'm looking to get a local game group together. Is anybody interested? I don't have any proof that works, but it seems like a possible avenue for finding local players. But it sounds like if you can find a local game shop, if you can go to your local library, right now is a really good time because D&D is way more popular than it's ever been. And so you're more likely to find people that at least know what it is and maybe are willing to try it out. Friends and family is always a good one. Trying out, going to like finding various Facebook groups, and then look in other social media sites for areas where you can and ask around like, hey, where can I find players in my area to play? And you might find them there. So those are kind of common ways to find them. But once you've got, and then there's a whole process of figuring out, are the players that I have found the right players for my game? That's another big topic. I have another article on Sly Flourish where I talk about like how you can kind of interview players, how you can make it clear to them what kind of game you want to run, how you can talk to them to learn what kind of games they want to play in. And then I would highly recommend that once you've found people to play, talk to them independently, go meet with them, go to a coffee shop, spend an hour talking with them. Hopefully, if they're not willing to sit down with you and spend an hour chatting about it, they might not be committed enough to join the game in general. And during that conversation, you can ask them, hey, tell me about your game, what kind of games you played in, what kind of background do you have? And generally you'll get a feeling for them during that kind of hour-long talk to see, like, is this somebody that I would want to have at my table playing in the game? Then your next layer is run a one-shot game. Don't schedule it at the time you're planning to run a game in general, or if you do, don't tell them that that's your regular planned game. And instead, invite them to a single session and have them play in a game and see how they are. That way you get an idea. Are they a power gamer in a game where I don't really want a power gamer? Or are they creepy in other ways? Like, what are things you can do that you can kind of determine, okay, yeah, I think this will be somebody good. And then eventually, once you have that, then you can kind of build your gaming group. This is all pretty hard. When they talk about like RPGs being a heartbreaker hobby, this is kind of the example of like, it's way harder to do this than it is to like whip up a group in Destiny to go on a mission while you're playing an online game. but it can be important in order to have that group. And trust me, once you have it, it's really, really rewarding. So then once you've found your group and you've got your players together, how do you make sure that you can play as often as possible? And I have two approaches for this. One is, I've described this before, both on this show and in other articles, about what I call the 6+2 group. And the idea is you try to build up a group where you have 6 full-time players that are committed to coming regularly. And then you have 2 people who are interested enough that they'd be willing to drop in from the game from time to time. So 2 people that you can call on to say, hey, I have a seat free. Would you be interested in playing? A lot of people say like, well, doesn't that suck for them? And it can if their intention is to be a full-time player. But some people, they already know their schedule is not going to be totally flexible and that they won't be able to play, or they just want to kind of dive in from time to time. They could be a friend of a friend. They could be somebody's spouse. They could be somebody's partner. And they say, oh, we'd love to have you sit in. We can't necessarily have you sit in all the time. For me, like, for example, I have one friend and his daughter will jump in the game when we have a free slot. So that can work out. So when you come up with a way to have some players who are like, some people are fine having the flexibility to only be coming every so often, that can still work for them. And you want to have those people on hand so you have somebody you can call when you have a seat free. And then you try to have 6 people who you think can make it regularly. So here's the interesting way you run it. All you need to actually run a game is 4 people, right? And I've heard some GMs that say we sometimes will run with 3. So if you can figure out how to build your game so that running with 4 people is possible, that means it takes 5 people canceling before you can't run a game. Because if 4 people cancel, if you have both your on-call people can't make it, and 2 of your regulars can't make it, that's 4 people, and you can still run it. It would take 5 people canceling before you can't run a game. That means that you're going to be running that game a lot more often than you won't be, unless everybody's flaking out all the time, which could happen. Again, like not everything is perfect. But I found that to work really well. And that means that I have very rarely canceled a game. In fact, about the only times I cancel a game is when I myself can't make it. I become the bottleneck because I have an issue that means I can't cancel. So a DM canceling is a big deal. But when you can design it so that up to 4 people can play, that means, and you have a 6+2 group, that means it takes 5 people canceling before the game doesn't happen. But you also have to design the game to be flexible for that, because a lot of people say, well, our stories are so tightly wound around the characters that if a particular character doesn't show up, that means the game can't go on. And that, if you want to build a system, if you want to build a group where you play more often than you don't, and that has that kind of flexibility, you can't build your system around that idea that if one player can't show up, the game can't go on. And that means you can't have these truly like deep character-focused games where the whole reason that this game is taking place is because of this one particular character. Instead, what you can do is treat the group as an abstract entity. It doesn't matter who's in the group, but the group itself is almost like an uber character. And the game is revolving around the actions and directions and focus of the group, not so much the character. And a way to think about this is like 1980s serial TV shows. I was talking about this with my wife, and it's like Knight Rider. If you watch the show Knight Rider or The A-Team or Walker, Texas Ranger or these other shows, you can almost play them completely out of order and they still work. It means that each session of your game needs to be its own cohesive arc. And this is why the whole idea of West Marches games are so popular. That with like a West Marches game, you have this idea that the players are the ones who bring the story to the GM, and the GM runs it for that particular group. And then the next week, a different group or a different set of players might show up with a different mission. And one of the reasons why that works is because you have this flexibility that the group that comes to the table is the group that's going to have a particular scenario. And another group that shows up is going to have a different one. So if you're building your campaign so that it's not necessarily, if you really need a robust campaign, a really resilient campaign where you're going to have players shifting in and out and you're worried about the story, instead try to make sure that the story focuses within one session. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You could still have an overarching story that everybody can kind of keep track of. But the individual adventures are not so tightly wound that if a player misses a session or two, they can come back and pick it right back up. And you want it to be the same way that if they miss a couple episodes of Knight Rider, they can still come back and pick it right back up. They still know who Kit is. They still know Michael Knight is. They still know why, whatever is going on in Devon and the truck and all that stuff, car, right? You have all that stuff that people, you can still pick it up. And that's why like summaries are important. You might have a player, I've had players who are out for a month. And they come back and they say, okay, here is the quick summary of what happened in the past month. And they fall back in line. And I'll tell you, I've been running this style now for almost I've been running it for like 16 or 17 years. We've had this kind of flexible game well before 5th edition. And I haven't had complaints. Like, I've been having a lot of fun. My players have been having a lot of fun. There are times where things kind of fall off a little bit. There are probably occasions where players miss a session that they were really looking forward to because it had something that they were interested in particular, but because of life circumstances, they couldn't make it, and we didn't hold and wait for them. But the reality is we've gotten to play a whole lot of games. We very rarely cancel a game, and it happens a lot. So I think when we think about like what the ideal is, and I think this is where this like RPG heartbreaker problem comes from, is all right, in ideal circumstances, we'd always have everybody at the table. We would have character-driven stories that are really deep and nobody would ever miss them. But the reality is life is busy and people are busy and people don't show up and people have real-life things going on. And if we want to keep playing, we have to build a game that's more resilient for that kind of flexibility. We need flexible games that can withstand it. And that means sometimes that the characters aren't quite as driven around a story, or that a player is going to miss a particular session that they might have been looking forward to. But the game rolls on. And so I think that in the same way that we think about building our game worlds to support the characters, we need to build our groups to support real life, because real life is complicated and has circumstances that come up where people can't make it, and we try to roll anyway. So those are some thoughts that I have about trying to build a resilient weekly game. I hope you found that useful, and I hope that by kind of either grabbing onto some of these ideas, or maybe you have other ideas on how to keep your game rolling all the time, how you manage to get as many sessions in as you can. And if you do, please leave a comment, and I definitely want to hear more about it. Every month on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Patrons of Sly Flourish can ask any RPG-related question. I answer every question every Friday. Some of those questions make it to the show. Other ones become catalysts for other articles or videos that I shoot in the future. Drunken Yoda says, if a player comes to you with a homebrew or third-party character option, class, race, or subclass, how do you decide if the option is okay to allow in your game? Context: I got players that sometimes come to me and say things like, I saw this subclass on Unearthed Arcana and I want to try it out, only for it to break the game in the middle of the campaign. Yeah, don't do that. So I think that the best way that I've come to work with this is that the players and the GM agree before the campaign begins what source material you are going to allow for a particular game. We've had heated conversations about this on the Sly Flourish Discord server. Some really believe that players should be able to bring any option that they want to the table. Others, like myself, believe that we actually come to kind of more interesting and richer individual campaigns when we limit the source material for any given campaign. For example, when I ran my Empire of the Ghouls campaign, we used only the 2014 Player's Handbook for D&D, and Midgard Heroes and the Midgard Heroes Handbook and the Tome of Heroes by Kobold Press. So that gave us 3 different books than we typically use, instead of like obviously using things like Tasha's and Xanathars. If I was running a Strixhaven game, I would say that you could use, for example, the Player's Handbook and maybe Xanathars or Tasha's and Strixhaven, but that's it. I wouldn't say you could use the material from Mythic Odyssey of Theros or something else where the material doesn't kind of fit. Certain campaign settings, like my City of Arches campaign setting, might allow for any possible origin, but you might say, okay, well, the origins are wide open. You can be a mammoth person or a turtle person or a cat person or a duck person or whatever, but we're still going to focus on particular classes, and we're going to pick specific class features. I think that by limiting the features for any given campaign and then changing those sources from campaign to campaign means that the game is going to feel very different from campaign to campaign, and that's going to be interesting. But I would probably say, and to answer this specific question, up front, during your session 0, before the players have built their characters, and that's key. Don't tell your players to build characters. They should not be built, right? In my ideal, the players are not building characters till you've already had a session 0. You've already know what the campaign is about. They know what other kind of characters the other players are thinking about. They know what the scenario is, and then they can start building their characters around it. And that means they already know what source material is allowed. And maybe under rare circumstances, if a subclass or a particular feature fit the theme of the campaign that you're running, then you might include it. But otherwise, I would not leave it wide open and say, oh, I want to try this out. Whenever a player says, I want to try something out, that usually means they don't really care about how it fits into the story. They just want to have some weird mechanics to try. And then are they really involved for the campaign, or are they just building a simulation in order to test characters out? Maybe if they want that, though, maybe you run one-shot games, so you try that out. You say, hey, well, yeah, we'll try that out. Well, I'll get to try some monsters against you that you've never heard before. Paul B says, we continue to vex about the suspicions around the use of AI on Discord and elsewhere. In an attempt to be even-minded, what areas of GM preparation and session play could be maximally aided by AI? I'll give an example to kick things off. D&D Beyond's encounter builder that could generate 3 to 5 encounters off of a standard ChatGPT style with accompanying map, short monster, NPC descriptions, and art. Boy, and we actually have another question. I'll cover both of these. Alex W says, I know you prefer to be these brief. He says that, and then it's like 200 words. So I'll get right to my question, though you can read more context if you like. I hate to bring up AI again, but where would you draw the line between simply using a tool like dice tables and, for a lack of a better term, cheating, like Chatbot GPT? I'm not saying all of those who use ChatGPT are cheaters, especially the way that you use it on occasions, such as to ask some ideas or tavern names or whatever, just that it seems to do the thinking for us in some cases. I'm referring more to the inevitable AI game master technology looming around the corner. I don't know if that's actually looming. One of my biggest issues with AI is the way it stifles creativity, even when it uses non-commercial ways. Something about it creating stuff that isn't made by a human being just bothers me. It just doesn't feel real. But lately, I've been getting into random generators like Perchance to help me roll non-essential NPCs like tavern patrons or town folks, and it has me thinking, is the use of random generators tables any better than using AI programs to stimulate creativity? For example, I entered some data from rolling tables, clothing, quirks, voice, whatever, into a private Perchance generator to mix and match and visualize possibilities without having to roll a ton of dice. I was able to come up with hundreds of unique NPCs for my players to interact with. I then started using it to help me develop plot hooks and came up with some really great ideas, but now I'm feeling down on myself that I didn't come up with it on my own. Maybe it's just a symptom of too much pressure being put on GMs to be genius storytellers, improv actors, world builders, rulers, adjudicators each and every week. I like being all of those things, don't get me wrong, but I think the expectation adds pressure, which adds stress and leads to burnout. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's a huge question, but I think it's a really important one. And I think these two are related. So one is like, where does AI, and by AI, I'm gonna focus on text generation, so large language models in particular, because AI is everywhere and everything. There's like, I don't want to get into like what AI is, but we've been using AI for decades already. I don't think anybody's like really talking about that, but we are talking about generative AI as one source, particularly for images and text. And then I'm going to focus more on text generation with large language models and what that has been doing for us. And I think, boy, it's a huge topic. Like the Pope is about to talk about it, for crying out loud. Everybody's talking about this. I will say this. I have spent a fair bit of time toying around with large language models in a lot of different ways. I have found them really useful in some ways, mostly for me for code generation. I have been able to write small scripts and small applications far easier with large language models who understand all the weird parameters and all the weird ways of doing things than I would have been on my own. I read today that there were studies that said a programmer with a large language model is kind of the equivalent of a 1.5 programmers. I think that's probably true. I think in the area of computer programming, I've seen it be very beneficial. In the world of DMing and GMing and game prep and stuff, I have toyed with it a lot. And my end answer is the best large language model for doing that is your brain. And getting into Alex W's thing, I think your brain, fueled by random lists and random generators and random tables and tools to help shake your brain and get you out of a rut, I have found to be more useful than using ChatGPT or other large language models. And another way, like one way I thought they would have been really useful would have been in like being able to feed it a whole bunch of source books for a particular area and then asking it questions and getting answers back from the degree of that source book. This is known as retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, as a particular style of a large language model use. And it's considered one of the better ways to get value out of a large language model. So you feed it a bunch of specific text on what you want, and then you ask it questions about that text and make sure that the answers that it's getting are coming from that text. In some cases, I find that to be really kind of useful and magical. But you know what else is really useful and magical? Reading the books. And what I found when I was working with a particular set of source material for a particular world is that it was actually better for me to just read the books and write notes down and cross-reference across books, and even use tools like just basic search or find, open up the PDFs and hit Control F and look for names. I found that to be far more useful than asking a large language model to do it. And that's for two reasons. One reason is when it generally screws up. Sometimes it's giving you back material that actually isn't from the source materials that you've read. That's known as poor precision. The precision of its answer is not good. But worse is recall. What is it not telling me? If I ask it for all of the gods of this region, how do I know those actually are the gods? The only way for me to know that is to go read the book. And guess what? If I'm reading the book, I don't need an LLM, right? I could just go read the book. So a good example would be like a common GM task might be, you know what? I want to get a random list. I want to build a random list. Like this is one that I would really do. Hey, I just got a giant source book of some game world. I want to know who all the deities in this game world are, and maybe all of the factions that exist in this game world. And I want to build a random list of like 1 to 20 so I can roll on that. And that way, when they find a monument out in the desert, the monument can be tied to a particular like religious faction or a particular god or something like that. A common thing for me to go is like feed all that stuff to a large language model and then say, give me 20 items that are associated with the gods. I don't know if it hit all the gods though. So what I can do instead is I can open the book and I can read it and I can make my list of the gods and I can build my own random list. And then I can roll on that one and I know it's complete or not because I'm the one that went and fetched it. So the recall is a lot better than it is if you're asking an LLM. So my experiences are, and part of me is like kind of angry at it, right? I don't really want to like them. And so I'm biased on this. And I know other people who are GMs who use them and find a lot of value in them. So if you find the value in them, I'm not your priest. You don't have to confess to me that you're finding value in them. If it's valuable to you and you want to use it and you don't have problems with it, I don't get to dictate to you what the issues are. And you already know all the other issues, power usage and the fact that they're built upon material that they didn't have permission to use and displacement of jobs and all the other aspects of the problems that these LLMs have. You get to decide whether or not those are problems to you or not. I think they are problems. But I think that, I really think that our brains fueled by random tables are better than large language models are. I think that you sitting down with your books, writing your notes, building your random tables is going to be better. And that has been done for 50 years. Random tables are fundamental to the nature of D&D. So getting to Alex's questions are you cheating when you use random tables? No, you are totally not cheating when you use random tables. Random tables are a fantastic way. That is the centaur mechanism of mixing technology with human beings. The idea, random tables with the human brain are better than just one of the two on their own. That if you roll randomly and you only go with what's random, it's going to suck and be weird and boring. And if you try to go with just your brain, you're going to come up with mundane common things because that's what your brain gravitates towards. But if you mix random tables with your human brain together, you come up with really fantastic ideas. This is something I've talked about on Sly Flourish before. I've got articles about it, and it's way more valuable. But I really think that random tables are different than what you get at an LLM. Because the LLM misses stuff. The LLMs also focus on the median, that they are like a bell curve. They're always going to go for the stuff that's the most mundane because that's the stuff they've got the most training on. They're not going to find those interesting edge cases. They're not going to find those things in the outside. Random tables do because they don't often have a curve like that. They're often flat. And when you roll a random table, you get really goofy answers sometimes. But sometimes those goofy answers are exactly what you need to push your brain in a new direction and come up with something really interesting. So I'm sure this is going to come up on the show again. I might do another segment on it, but I am definitely bearish about AI and how it's going to work with GMs to prep material. I'll just touch on images too. A lot of people are like, oh man, image generation is so great because I can make NPCs. You could also just Google and find images of people that an actual artist did. You could go find stock art that people have done. There's a lot of fantasy artwork out there for stuff. And I really don't think you actually need generative AI to find good pictures. I think you can just find good pictures that human beings did, and you can use that in your games too. So I really don't feel like generative AI or large language models are really shaking up. And maybe this, I don't think this is like me just making this choice. I've been using them. I've been trying them. I've experimented with them. I experiment with them a lot. I try new versions of them as they come out, and I see interesting things. But what I have found over like a year and a half of using them is that our brains with random tables are going to come up with more interesting things than I think we're going to get out of an LLM. And I think that in many cases, the kinds of things we're asking an LLM to do, if we do them ourselves, we're going to get better answers and better results, and it's more fun, and our games are going to be better for it. So that's how I feel about it now. I don't know if that's how I'm going to feel about it 2 years from now or whatever. But right now, that's really where I feel AI has a place or doesn't have a place in what we do. The best large language model is the one in your head. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today. It is always a great pleasure to talk to you. If you like this show and you want more stuff like this, please subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You can find a link in the show notes. You get a free adventure generator PDF, and you get a weekly article about this fantastic hobby of ours with links to all of the other stuff that I do all across the internet. You can also support me directly on Patreon. You get access to things like the 5e Artisanal Monster Database, the virtual tabletops from the Dwarven Forge virtual tabletops, all kinds of stuff you get for being a patron, but you also get access to the awesome Lazy GM community where we talk about topics like this all throughout the week, and you help me put on shows like this. And you can also pick up any of my books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy DM Workbook, Lazy DM's Companion, which is packed with random tables that you can use to help shake up your brain and come up with interesting ideas for your adventures, and many, many more on the Sly Flourish Bookstore. Thank you all so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.